Want to stay up to date with everything that's happening on the show? Or do you have a story that you'd like to submit for one of our Listener Stories episodes? You can get in touch with the show via the website at www.hauntedukpodcast.com, on Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, on X at hauntedukpod, or you can email us at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and TikTok. And if you want to support the show, you can do it via either Patreon or Ko-fi. Both platforms have exactly the same content, but work in slightly different ways. One of the advantages of Patreon is its sleek user interface, but if you want to avoid those pesky additional charges Apple, Google and Patreon apply to your subscription, then why not give Ko-fi a try? Simply open a browser window and type ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast. That's Ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast, and you'll soon find us. Whichever platform you choose, we're sure you'll enjoy the bonus content. Thanks for listening and enjoy the episode. Exhausted, he approached his doorstep with heavy footsteps, his eyes glued to the cobblestones, when he heard the clang of something hit the ground. It was a comb, the symbol of the Banshee, and when he looked ahead to his doorstep, an old ghostly woman with the longest grey hair looked at him. Her face wizened, hag-like. She silently pointed up to the sky with her fingers. This is episode 59 of the Haunted UK podcast, and this is the tale of the Banshee, a powerful Celtic legend who heralds death to families on the island of Ireland. But this episode is also about death and the power it holds over our living days, the prospect of which, to a degree, haunts us all. Life can be a rocky path, and the destination is, of course, the end. Death. We can't avoid it. And while this episode is very much about one of the most legendary harbingers, the Banshee, perhaps it is also about ourselves, our intuition. How sometimes we can sense death and be harbingers ourselves. Thomas Hardy in 1891 once chillingly wrote in his famous novel Tess of the d'Urbervilles the following: Tess suddenly thought one afternoon, when looking in the glass at her fairness, that there was yet another date of greater importance, that of her own death. A day which lay sly and unseen among all the other days of the year, giving no sign or sound when she annually passed over it, but not the less surely there. This is an uncomfortable thought, of course, the notion that in blissful ignorance we live, walk, and pass over our future death date each year, and perhaps it is that day unseen which is the foundation of all our nightmares, our fears. The manifestation of the Banshee is steeped in magic, fairy lore, but it's also soaked in a bloody history and taps into our very real fear about the finality of death, as well as the intuition which can be intrinsic to it. that subtle awareness of that day, hour, that moment which really does lay sly and, thankfully, unseen in our lives. A date which will one day be chiselled on a headstone. Yet for some people in Ireland, the Banshee knows that date very well. It's instead chiselled into her heart, and she wants people to know, to be ready. For this episode we are mostly in Ireland, exploring her history, her hills, her people, for the Banshee is deeply connected to the land of Ireland. She rises from it like a mist, and just like a mother, she collects her people. She warns, she cries, she haunts. Her wail is frightening for most, but sometimes a comfort for others. It depends on which angle you hear her from. But one thing for sure, it's best not to actually see her, to witness her in action. Banshee means woman of the fairy mound, and to simplify her legend, it is as follows. She appears in the night on the land of a family in Ireland with mournful, often blood-curdling screaming, wailing or sobbing to foretell a death. Those that hear her cry will never forget it. It settles in your bones, shuffles your senses, and while others will offer explanations that it is a fox or a cat in the night, those that have heard it have a deep knowing of what it really is. She appears in different guises, sometimes as an old woman with frightening gnarled features, or as an old washerwoman kneeling by a stream washing bloody clothes. Sometimes she'll appear small, doll-like, shrouded in white, and sometimes as a beautiful young woman with a comb or harp in her hand, her hair sometimes golden, or a furnace of red or black as the pitch of the night above her. Her hair always long, flying like ropes up into the wind, or eerily combed forward, covering her face. And her comb, well, that is never far from her side. A word to the wise though, don't ever pick up that comb, and never ever watch her. She won't care for it, and nothing good can await you if she catches you. Perhaps a long stay in purgatory, rather than a quick route to heaven, or even blindness. It's unlikely and rare that she would appear inside a house. She likes to be on the land, the earth, to pace the hills, for her wail to surround the family homestead, to almost arise from the fields. If she sings a beautiful song, or if the wail is very high, she is in fact signalling the death of a very young person. It is true that as well as a scream, she can perform a throaty, chilling chuckle, but she can also, rather disconcertingly, rap at a window pane to let you know she's there. She cries for certain families, those which have the prefix of O or Mac, that is the O'Neills, O'Connors, O'Briens, O'Gradys, and even the Kavanaghs, and the Fitzgeralds and many others, but it is always the Irish she cries for. The legend of the Banshee is a fascinating one, but equally interesting are people's reactions on hearing her cry, and what this may mean for them, their grim acceptance, their hasty preparations, their blood-draining fear, their respect. Marie, who works with me on the show, tells of her grandmother in Ireland, Mary Agnes, who, while wonderful and fun, had no time for ghosts, yet a reverence for the Banshee. Marie's grandparents lived in a beautiful bungalow by a stream, a dense forest, and if the night was cloudy, the darkness was pithy. It had a depth, a density you felt you could grab hold of or collide into. But when the stars were out, it was different. Some nights it felt like the Milky Way was out in full, unraveling itself across the sky like a white train of a dress, or a cloak. On many nights, though, there were clouds blocking out the stars, and it was that formidable darkness again. And to Marie, in bed as a little girl in that bungalow, it seemed to amplify every sound. She could hear the crackles from the open fire in the living room, her grandad puffing on his pipe, even the stream not too far from her window. It was undeniably peaceful, restful, but to a child it also loomed and felt scary when you were used to streetlights poking through the curtain. The following story is not actually Marie's but her cousin, who we shall call Grace, and this occurred on one of those nights when the darkness was thick and unforgiving. It was the Christmas holidays, so it was midwinter and the branches on trees looked like Banshee's arms themselves. And while this story is definitely creepy, it's her granny's reaction to their experience which has always stayed with Grace and with Marie too. Grace was over from England with her brother, Malachi, and her much younger siblings, and they were sitting on the twin beds which were aligned opposite each other, with a dressing table and a little lamp to break up the darkness. Their mum told them to turn it out, to go to sleep. It was so suddenly dark and scary, they decided to keep the curtains open. It somehow made the darkness navigational. They could see the corners of the beds at least. As children of that age do, they were giggling, talking about school and so forth, and, let's face it, probably ghosts, when suddenly they heard a sharp tap at the window. They sat up, looked, but nothing was there. Rain had not long started up. It was a little windy. They summarized it was a twig, a hard drop of rain perhaps. They heard taps at the window again. Grace yelped and yelled, "There's a hand! A hand! It had a glove on!" Malachi heard the taps all right and looked outside, but again nothing was there. But they both recalled that out of the corner of their eye, as if someone had just stepped out of their view, was a billowing of material, like a white blanket, a dress, or even worse, a cloak. Grace, her face ashen, solemnly reported again that she saw a gloved hand. In an instant, her first thought was that it was a woman's or a girl's, but in an instant, whoever can be sure. They got up, opened the window. The material had gone, but the barbed wire along the front garden from the field was vibrating, moving up and down, like someone had just run through it. It was very strange. A blanket or cloak or dress, and a tap on the window pane. Being a little shook up, they ran to their granny, only for her to laugh kindly, instructing them to go to bed. But they insisted, and Mary Agnes was having none of it.
"Don't be talking to me about ghosts. Don't be talking to anyone else about it either."
"But, Granny,"
they pleaded.
"That's enough, I won't hear any more."
They were both concerned there was someone on the land. Their granddad and dad promptly looked round the bungalow and barns until they were sure all was fine. But of course, nothing was there. No sign of anything. Just the memory of the female gloved hand, the billowing of material in the rainy wind. The next morning, they talked about it again. Mary Agnes said, "I told you not to talk of ghosts now." It would be one of the kids from down the lane. In truth, it could well have been. The children over from England were fair game, although it has to be said, they were only ever lovely to them. Yes, it could have been many explainable things. A trick of the light, a hallucination, a kid, an intruder, high jinks. It may have, of course, been entirely imagined, but it could also have been something else. And it's always made Grace wonder to this day, the strange combination of it all. She still talks about it now as an adult, and gave permission for it to be included. So yes, it could have been a ghost, but Granny, Mary Agnes, was having none of it. "A banshee then," Grace offered, full of thoughts of the banshee from Disney's Darby O'Gill and the Little People.
"Ah, yes, a banshee. I hope not. Now, banshee, that's something else altogether."
And it was the something else that intrigued Grace. Her grandmother's usual disbelief in the paranormal was countered with not an instant dismissal of the Banshee, but instead a nod, an acknowledgement, a respect, and maybe even a slight fear of it. It may have been said flippantly, but her logical granny seemed, at least in that moment, to believe in the Banshee. And that in itself was a revelation, and quietly terrifying. But we'll return to Mary Agnes later. Meanwhile, let's go to County Clare, where there's a river, Dailach River, nicknamed the Banshee's Brook, that runs red. On second glance, you'll realise with much relief that this has to do with the natural iron ore that resides deep in the riverbed. But on the first glance, you may believe it to be blood, and if you dig a little deeper in that riverbed, you'll find a legend as old as that river and the hills surrounding it, that this river turns blood red just before a local is set to die, swiftly followed by the Banshee's cry, and it does not return to its usual pewter grey colour again until the person has died. Suddenly, your first thought from the first glance seems the most plausible explanations. Banshees weeping and washing bloody clothes by rivers, particularly of fallen soldiers and their armour, is a common image in the story of the Banshee. In fact, this is the central function of the Banshee in Scotland, and she's often called the washerwoman of the ford. The idea of a Banshee appearing with a warning or crying for soldiers in battle originates somewhere within the Celtic pantheon of gods and goddesses. And to understand the Banshee, we need to understand the land of Ireland and its old ways before Christianity arrived in the 5th century, slaying an established spiritual system in its wake, where different gods, goddesses held the hills, the mountains, the fairy mounds, and from there directed its flawed human folk. The god and goddesses descended from Tuatha De Danann, meaning the folk of the goddess or the tribe of the gods, and this is what they were. They inhabited an other world within mounds or hills, interacting with humans occasionally. This tribe consisted of gods, goddesses, poets, druids, kings and queens and healers, but they were within the land, inside a hill, a mound. Christians eventually go on to write about them, classing them as fallen angels, a mixture of good and evil, and here is where their story began to change. Further along the line, they were called the Sidhe, spelt S-I-D-H-E, or fairy folk. So I'm sure you can see and hear the link between goddess and Banshee, the woman of the mound. There were many goddesses who made this transition, but let's start with the most formidable, Morrigan, the original Banshee if you like, often described as the war goddess, but also goddess and guardian of the dead. Morrigan can be translated into phantom queen, and some scholars have suggested the root word mor is connected to the Anglo-Saxon word mare, which would evolve into the word nightmare. And Morrigan does have something of the nightmare about her. For example, to see Morrigan on the battlefield 1,000 years ago would have been all of your nightmares split open before you. Her story is complex, a shapeshifter, a triple goddess. She is Niemann, Marcha, and Bav. All three are bloodthirsty goddesses of the battlefield, but together they are Morrigan, or sometimes rather frighteningly known as the Morrigan. Her image is often depicted as that of the head of a crow or raven, a vulture, or an inverted triangle. She was worshipped all over Europe, but particularly in warrior societies like that of Ireland around the Copper Age. The Dár Síos Annan, a mountain range in County Kerry, is said to be Morrigan's breasts, her physical image very much part of the landscape, and when her people die, she's there to let them know. She isn't death exactly, but the guardian of it, and she's not supposed to be of any comfort but frightening, inspiring respect for the natural order of things, which includes the eventual death of all. Legend has it that she would hover over the battlefields of Ireland, her long black hair flowing, enjoying the massacre, the brutality of axes, and her fleet of ravens would feed on the men slain, and it was here that she would let out a baleful yet mournful wail for the fallen. She is one but also three, which is why she's hard to describe and depict, and her sisters, Niman, Macha and Bav, which make up Morrigan, are all some of the many ascendants of what we now know as the Banshee. Another goddess who, with time and Christianity, has turned into a Banshee is Áine. Goddess, fairy queen, where Morrigan was the dark, Áine is the light. In fact, her name translates into brightness. A goddess of fertility, midsummer, a rich harvest. In the old times, people would worship her hill in Knockane, County Limerick, burn straw in her honour in the hope of a good harvest, as well as a wish that she would appear. Indeed, there are records of this ritual as recently as 1879. Irish gods and goddesses differ from other pantheons in the ancient pre-Christian world because they were seen as ascendant deities, connected to families and therefore would be attached to a family, if you were noble enough, and this is perhaps where the idea of a banshee being attached to certain families sprung from. It is thought that Áine is attached to the Fitzgerald family, and the history of this is again bloodthirsty. There are some accounts which include Áine being assaulted and raped by a king, or seer, or other mortals as she played her beautiful harp on her hill, all desperate to secure her lineage and infuse it with her mythical magical DNA. And while she is frequently drawn as ethereal, dreamy, beautiful, she could also get very real and rightfully stand her ground and fight. When the king Alil Olam tried to force himself on her, she promptly bit his ear off. A clever action indeed, for no man by law could be a king unless whole in body. Biting off his ear robbed him of his power. However, it is the Earl of Desmond which fuses and transforms Áine from goddess into the Banshee legend that we now know. Gerald Fitzgerald, Earl of Desmond, one day saw the beautiful Áine by Loch Gur. Contently combing her hair, her magical cloak sprawled out by her side, and in a world of her own. Overcome by a savage lust, the Earl leapt on Áine, and without her cloak, she was without her power, leaving her vulnerable and unable to sense the Earl creeping up behind her. The awful Earl took advantage, raping Áine, taking away her dignity, her light. In the midst of this assault, she warned him that a child would be born from this forced union, and that he will be a great child, and that the Earl should never express any surprise at something remarkable, great, and impossible that he will do one day. 9 months later, a very pregnant Áine turned up at the castle doors, and there she gave birth to a son, Gerald. Soon after giving birth, Áine left the castle, and Gerald grew up to be a handsome, strong young man. All at court admired him, and many women yearned for him. The story goes that one day there was a feast at the castle. A young, attractive woman who had caught Gerald's eye declared she could run and leap so high she could clear the feasting tables. Gerald, flirting, dared her to do so, and she did, wowing the festival crowd around her. "Can you do that, Gerald?" she said to him rather teasingly. "I can do better." As he placed his goblet of wine down, throwing down his gauntlet as such, he took a big run-up, cleared the tables and promptly jumped and disappeared inside a bottle and jumped out again. The crowd roared in shock and disbelief. The most shocked was the Earl himself, showing that surprise that something remarkable and impossible Gerald, his half-deity son, had done, the very thing Áine warned him about. In an instant, Gerald's face thundered. He stormed out of the castle and headed to Loch Gur, where he dipped his toes and instantly turned into a goose, flying high to return to his mother, never to be seen until years later. And years later, the Earl was on his deathbed. Áine and Gerald arrived like ravens at the door, rushed to his room and sat with him, promptly taking him away from this mortal plane. The Earl disappeared and hasn't been seen since 1389. But some will say, if you look carefully into the waters of Loch Gur, you will see the reflection of Áine in her crystal palace where she sits proudly with her son. Sometimes you can even see the Earl ride above the water upon a goose. Loch Gur in County Limerick is said to have magical healing properties, and many see it as a sacred place. In years gone by, people of Limerick would bring their sick to the lake at full moon for healing. Áine is said to visit the sick who can't get better with her brother and sing them to sleep, a deathly lullaby, until they die. Yet the story of Áine and the Earl and their son Gerald is a story the Fitzgerald family have adapted as their history, and as a result, she is their Banshee. The Fitzgerald were one of the Norman families successful in the conquest of Ireland, desperate for their very own Irish deity to cement their status in their new country. So over time, like the Morrígan and her sisters, Áine became a Banshee who cries for any member of the Fitzgerald family when they are about to die. She is also reportedly a Banshee for the O'Cora clan. Other goddesses such as Clína cries for the McCarthys, and the O'Carrolls have a Banshee called Una, and there are many more. But it isn't only goddesses who have turned into Banshees, it's mortal ordinary Irish women too. This can be a female relative attached to her family, still lovingly warning them of her death. Or it can be a vengeful act, a macabre deed, fully enjoying being the signal of death to a family who have wronged her. Wronged, tragic women drowned or felled by love are the cornerstone of many an Irish folk song. You only have to listen to the famous ballad Step It Out Mary, sung out from the likes of the High Kings or the Dubliners as an example. Poor Mary, already in love with a local young soldier, is promised by her father to a much older wealthy cutlery man, and she's told to step it out and dance like a puppet before him and do as she's told. It tragically ends with her drowning herself along with her hopes and with her lover in the local river. It's an upbeat song with a dark story and a common theme reflecting an old practice in Ireland, or indeed many places, of marrying your daughter off to a much older man for financial security. Women in history have never had it easy anywhere, but this is certainly true in Ireland, where the Catholic Church shaped social policy for decades in the 19th and 20th centuries. Women's reproductive rights were largely ignored, and shockingly, right up to the mid-1990s, some young unmarried pregnant women could find themselves being sent to a Magdalene laundry or a mother and baby home run by the church, their families assured, scandal evaded, their babies taken away, dealt with, and the young mothers kept as slaves, forced to wash their shame seemingly away in the laundries, inflicted with extreme abuse, along the way by those in society they trusted and thought of as kind, spiritual, wise. The way they abuse their authority and trust is unforgivable. The huge tragedy and scandal it created reverberates across Ireland still, affecting many families today. With this in mind, perhaps an interesting contrast can be made between Irish women in recent times to that of their ancestors. Women of ancient Ireland enjoyed a lot of rights, freedoms, certainly more than her European counterparts. And while there were definitely some constraints in male-dominated ancient Ireland, she could do the following: enjoy equal status to her husband, inherit and own property, divorce her husband after the first year if she was unhappy, even choose who she wanted to marry, and what's more, she was protected under the law and treated the same as a man. The evidence from this comes from disapproving notes from the Roman and Greek sources who thought Celtic societies were backward and barbarian. And if you look at the Celtic pantheon, it has just about an equal number of gods and goddesses, with the goddesses holding as much power over crops, life and fortune as the gods. So, when we make this contrast between women in more recent centuries, right up to the 21st century, to that of the freewheeling, law-protecting time of women in ancient Ireland, just before the Romans invaded, swiftly followed by Christianity which tidied everything spiritually messy away, brought one God to the land, one way of living, and with it a gradual dominance of the church over family and women's life. When there's such a contrast, then is it any wonder that we have women back from the dead, with a scream so sharp it could scorch the earth? Is the Banshee a scream of anguish? Perhaps this is too simplistic a thought, but I think it makes a plausible argument. So many women in life forced to save face, keep appearances, hide it all away and step it out. Perhaps in death they are screaming it out, finally able to express their repressed pain, balefully. This certainly was the case for our first tale of the Banshee. Wronged in life, she took great pleasure in telling one family it was their time to die. This is the famous story of the O'Connor family, and this is a soap opera-worthy fairy tale, torturous with a dash of a jilted bride. The story goes that Felim was the only son of the O'Connor clan, and while hunting one day, he was wounded by an arrow meant for a stag. He was taken to a lodge deep in the gnarly forest. There he was nursed by a woodsman and his beautiful daughter. Of course, as these stories go, he stayed there for some time as he recovered, and predictably, fell in love with the daughter. In the forest, they vowed to be together forever. They were deeply in love and made a promise to marry. In fact, they secretly wed. Deep down, Felim knew he would never be able to marry the woodsman's daughter. His father would rage, and his courage failed him. He never told her that this marriage would never be permitted. Now the O'Connor clan were prestigious, wealthy, and Felim's father had great marriage plans for him, with none other than the Princess of Munster. He returned to the castle and with some sheepish pluck told his father he was in love with the woodcutter's daughter, and he was in fact married. His father, as expected, raged and ordered his guards to hunt this girl down and do something about her. She was indeed tracked down in the forest and dragged away, dealt with. Felim was distraught and looked everywhere for her, but no one knew where she was. There was no trace of his beloved. With his father snapping at his heels, he knew he had to marry the princess. On the day of the wedding, and with a heavy heart, he trudged to his newly pledged bride. Meanwhile, the woodsman's daughter was still alive, but in the castle's dungeons, malnourished, weak, tortured. On the day of the wedding, the guardsmen of her cell were drunk and unaware, so she managed to escape. She stumbled to the wedding, wretched and half-starved. The solemn Felim turned round to see his true bride, and as he gasped, she let out a piercing scream, before falling to the floor to her death. Felim was inconsolable and sobbed by her side, desperately trying to bring her back. He couldn't, and neither could he bring his own heart back together. Naturally, the wedding did not go ahead, and disgusted with his son, his father sent him to war. Broken-hearted, Felim did not last long on the battlefield and died quickly. On the night he died, back at the castle, the same familiar anguish cry could be heard from his true love, the woodsman's daughter. But she hasn't left the O'Connors. She's come back for them all, screaming a piercing death throw into the night for any impending death in the family. Far from some warning angel, she takes delight in another O'Connor being wiped out, taken away like they did to her so many years ago. Lamenting isn't just an occupation of the Banshee though. It was actually a very human occupation in Ireland, lending another layer to the Banshee legend, and that is the practice of keening. Keening is a lament for the dead, as they are buried accompanied usually by a harp. The word keen comes from the Irish word trína, which means to cry or to weep. Up until the 19th century, the funeral party would be divided into two groups of women, and the body of the dead would be elevated slightly, adorned with flowers, and the two parties would take turns singing a lament before joining together in a chorus. What would follow would be questions sung to the dead like, why did they die? Were they crossed in love? The keeners would rock back and forth and sing and cry. What evolved was keeners being hired for funerals to cry and sing a keen. Indeed, keeners were seen as the human manifestation of the Banshee. It was thought that if you were a bad keener, you would become a Banshee in the afterlife to learn how to keen properly. With the heavy influence of the Catholic Church coming into play from the 1820s, this practice was discouraged and eventually banned. But you can see how the lament for a death is ingrained in the foothills and soul of Ireland. The Banshee is still there to cry for the dead, complete with the harp, if you're lucky, and if she's feeling tender. But what about real stories of real people hearing the Banshee cry? Well, the National Folklore Commission's The Schools collection is rich with such stories, and it's a database really worth reading through. The Schools collection was a bid to capture Ireland's long-held oral tradition of storytelling. Children in schools throughout the early decades of the 20th century were asked to record and transcribe their families' and neighbours' stories. Prevalent among them were tales of the Banshee, witness testaments, and they're actually quite chilling. One girl tells of a night 20 years before, when her dad heard a Banshee around the time their young neighbour Mary O'Donnell was took ill. It was summertime, and her father was milking the cows in the fields. The cows started to act strange. A cry was heard, and the cows were running away in circles from her father, and he couldn't milk them. The atmosphere became charged. Nothing would settle in the fields. The air felt full of a spark. An hour later, it was said that the Banshee appeared tapping at Mary's window, and she died immediately. Another young girl in the collection recalls that the old people in her neighbourhood believed fervently in the Banshee. She wrote,
I often heard my mother say that there were certain families who always cried for. These families were the McGowans, the Gallaghers, the Keenes, the Means, and the O'Briens.
However, this Irish schoolgirl had a strange experience herself during the Spanish flu pandemic.
On the night of the 14th of March 1919, my sister and I went out at 10 o'clock to get some turf to rake the fire. Suddenly we heard a most unearthly cry. It started about a mile away from us and ran along the ground for about half a mile away, and then ran along the ground for another half a mile. Then it began to ascend and went up and up and up, getting fainter as it went until it died away in the sky. We never heard anything so strange and concluded that it must be the Banshee. We went home and told our people that we heard a Banshee. Oh, they laughed at us. Then it happened that our next door neighbour, Mrs. D, whose maiden name was Gallagher, took the flu that night and was dead that day week.
There are reams of such stories. They are as fascinating as they are terrifying. You'll notice the girl reported that her people laughed, disbelieving. And in these stories there seems to be a curious mixture of reverence, but also a reluctance to believe in this angel of death. But what more of modern sightings? One famous story of the Banshee set in relatively recent times, 1941, is the account of the Banshee of the East Wall. East Wall is right by Dublin Port, and in 1941 it was on high alert, dreading the potential of an air raid, particularly this part of the city so close to the docks. On this particular night in East Wall, a man was seriously ill and a doctor was called. The doctor's wife was understandably nervous at being left when a raid might occur, so he advised her to take herself and their 3 children to stay with his mother over in the North Strand. She agreed and readily went. The doctor attended to the dying man, where he heard a wail from outside. Busy with his work, he dismissed this as a cat. However, the dying man's wife did not. She was panicked and began crying herself. She grabbed a bottle of holy water and sprinkled it maniacally on the floor and around her husband's bed. Solemnly, she begged the Banshee to spare her husband. Her hysteria was getting in his way, and he was annoyed by such old ways. In the early hours, he was satisfied that his patient was at least stable and left to go home. Exhausted, he approached his doorstep with heavy footsteps, his eyes glued to the cobblestones, when he heard the clang of something hit the ground. It was a comb, the symbol of the Banshee, and when he looked ahead to his doorstep, an old ghostly woman with the longest grey hair looked at him. Her face wizened, hag-like. She silently pointed up to the sky with her fingers. The knuckles, he noticed, were knotted and swollen, and where she pointed, he saw 3 bombers, plumes of smoke, turrets of fire, and the North Strand half on its way to being destroyed, where his wife and children were. If you were there, you would be unsure of who screamed the loudest next, the Banshee or the doctor, fully realizing what this could mean. No! The story reports that the man lost his wife, children, and mother-in-law in that raid. The Banshee, of course, knew and was trying to let him know. In Barry Fitzgerald and Cormac Strain's book, The Banshee, which I strongly recommend if you are interested in further reading about the Banshee, they set out to discover if modern Ireland still has such sightings, and the tales are varied, convincing, and speak of the power we perhaps all have when sensing death. The accounts tap into that anxiety deep within, when a loved one is in hospital dying and we are awaiting news, your senses heightened, waiting for the phone to ring in the middle of the night. That ring, or series of beeps, every bit as terrifying as hearing the Banshee's shrill wail. One story in the book defies many of the myths of the Banshee legend, and is an account from Katharina Webber, whose family encountered the Banshee back in 2003, an encounter that forced them to move out of their home. Catherine and her husband, Daniel, are German. Daniel had got a job in County Cork, and exhausted from such frequent departures and long absences from the family, they made a big decision to take a leap into the unknown and move to Ireland with their 2 young children. One thing was certain: what happened next was the unknown. The book reports that Katharina's father was diagnosed with a terminal illness in the autumn of 2002. As it would, this weighed heavily on Katharina's mind as they made the big move to Ireland, but her father was sanguine about the whole thing and urged her to live her life. As Christmas approached, her dad had been given a good prognosis, and her brothers told her to enjoy Christmas. Her dad was doing well, with at least a good year of living left in him. Christmas came and went in their new 200-year-old house in Ireland. They felt settled here with their new jobs, the kids in school, and the old house was beginning to feel like home. But on the 15th of January, this all changed. The book reports that the house felt different somehow, almost like someone or something was in there. The air was charged with uncertainty. The dogs were disquiet, restless, and as the night drew in, this restlessness transformed into a raw agitation, and they began to ceaselessly bark and growl at something in the house. Daniel got up to check the house, and the dogs followed him as he checked every room, almost as if they were helping him. Katharina stresses in her account that both dogs were ordinarily very gentle, and it would take a lot for them to bark. Daniel was assured that all was well and returned to bed. What happened later is incredibly frightening. They both were woken up by the female dog growling and grunting relentlessly. Rare for her. And the male dog was perched in the middle of the room, staring at something. Understandably, the couple were freaked out, and Daniel again got up, convinced that maybe someone was trying to break in. As he left the room, the dogs went absolutely mad, barking wildly, almost in warning, in protest, not wanting him to leave that room. It was then they heard a child crying its eyes out. And of course, Daniel thought it was one of their children, but a mad dash to their bedroom confirmed, thankfully, that it wasn't. When he turned out their bedroom, he saw one of the dogs crouching and growling outside the small bathroom, and it was then he heard a woman sobbing. This woman's mournful cry sliced through Daniel and Katharina, and they were paralyzed by fear, confusion. All of a sudden, the sobbing stopped. The dogs stopped growling, and then an eerie silence. Not even daring to look at each other, trying to process what had just happened, when this odd silence was pierced with that shrill ring of a house phone echoing with such sharpness in the night in the hallway of their house. As we know, such a phone call at such an hour never brings good news. It was Katharina's mother telling her her father had passed 5 minutes ago. This is such an unsettling tale, but it does upend the myth that A, the Banshee only cries for the Irish, those born in Ireland, and for those with certain surnames, and B, interestingly, that she was seemingly inside the house. Fitzgerald, the author of this excellent book, does offer the point that, quote, the Banshee itself has been around longer than the concept of surnames, end quote. There's an aspect of the Banshee legend that we cannot ignore, and that is to make sure you never see her, never spy on her. If you hear her, stay inside and give her respect and space. But what if you don't? What if your curiosity got the better of you? What then? There's another account in Fitzgerald and Strain's The Banshee, which tells us exactly what, and that's the story of Tony Brown. It tells of one night, in his home in Dublin, Tony was doing battle with a lasagna dish, trying to get rid of the stubborn pasta with a scour brush, when suddenly he heard a cry, which he dismissed as a wailing cat, but still it continued, and it unsettled him. Unloading the washing machine, his mind slightly ruffled, he decided he would hang out the washing. His garden is described as being long and Victorian, and as he walked outside, he caught sight of a cloak, a blanket perhaps, a flash of white. Curiosity got the better of him, and he ventured further down the garden, like I guess most people would, to see what this was. It was something he would always regret. Immediately, in an eye drop of a second, there was a whoosh and a scream of a woman right in his face, a gust of wind about him, and her face. He couldn't ever forget her face, ancient, haggard, angry. Like a child, Tony put his hands over his eyes, hoping she would go away, and at that, He was dimly aware of her hovering just above him. Terrified, he looked up, but she'd gone. Yet her image in his mind remained, so much so that her face returned to him night after night, in nightmares or even when he just closed his eyes, seared there. This, in a way, may relate to the old belief that if you see a banshee or spy on a banshee, you'll go blind. There are many terrifying modern encounters with the banshee, which Fitzgerald and Strain detail. It's an incredible book, and the stories long stay with you. Another name the banshee goes by, particularly in County Wexford, is the Bow. The Bow would mournfully wail to warn of a death of somebody in the neighbourhood, but she would always have a comb. Michael Fortune, a folklorist, has archived oral records of Irish traditions and stories from Ireland for over 25 years. His YouTube channel is really worth a visit. There lies a treasure trove of real experiences with supernatural and everyday tales from grandparents' grandparents. It really is incredibly fascinating. Here on this channel lies stories from the Raheen area in County Wexford and that of the Bow. Most say she is a banshee, some a witch, but they all say the same thing, that she comes to herald a death and she always has a comb. Strangely, combs are often found in the local fields, but if one is found, people distance themselves from it quickly, returning it to the soil. For when she comes back to collect the dead, she comes back for her comb too. Older people tell of generations before them recounting of the Bow coming back looking for her comb, knocking at the window, the doors, the priest even instructing locals to use fire tongs to give the comb back to her. One man remembers an old man from his childhood who said he heard her mournful wail outside the house every night for 5 nights. He could bear it no more and went out and knocked the comb out of her hand. In return, she was angry and scratched his hand, savagely ripping 4 slices of flesh as she did. His hand was never the same. Her talons were like knives, he said. Another man talks of a time 60 years or so ago when he was a little boy. He was with his uncle at night having dinner when suddenly a mournful wail was heard. His uncle motioned. "Shh."
"Oh, that there is the banshee. Don't be afraid. It's for Mary Murphy. She's coming for her."
His uncle sent him home over the dark fields, and he was terrified as he could still hear the banshee's wail as he ran home. And it was true. Mary Murphy died that very night, at 10 minutes to 12. The banshee has country cousins in the Scottish Highlands and in Wales. In Scotland, there is the washerwoman who is similar to the Irish washer banshee, and she is known as the washerwoman at the ford. The Bean Nighe. She too washes the blood-sodden clothes of those who are about to die in the river or any pool of water. She's reportedly ugly, small, with long hanging breasts which never got to feed her child. She is the spirit of a woman who died in childbirth, condemned to live out the rest of her life she didn't live, or at least live in some cruel in-between world. Nordic and Scottish banshees tend to be kinder, with the exception of the Aberdeenshire banshee, who demands an offering of barley cake, or else, as she guards a well between 2 hills, travellers would always have to leave some cake for her or face her wrath. There's also the Ceonag, a type of Highland banshee who weeps for those fallen in battle. Parents of sons in war would dread her cry. And in Wales there is the Gwrach, very similar to the banshee, but with some differences. She has huge leather wings for a start. She arrives in the night on lonely roads, always near water, and if seen, it'll be in a sea of fog. And there you will be able to make out her ugly form, leather wings, and hear her cry deliver bad news of untimely or timely death. You may be distracted by the wings, her long black teeth, or her tendency to take blood from children. Before we leave the pool of water banshees seem to reside by, let me also alert you to another Irish harbinger of doom, that of the fetch. Similar in fact to that of the German doppelganger, but with a few differences. A fetch is the very double of someone, but it is not them, and God knows what it is. Maybe that's the subject of another episode. But they are often grey, shadowy, and phantom-like, sometimes seen by its human double and sometimes not. Sometimes they are the only ones not to see it. If you see a fetch, it could go either way depending when you see it. If you see the double of this person in the morning, it means the longevity and health of that particular soul. But if you see them in the evening, it's the herald of their certain demise, and if their movements are jagged or erratic, it means a violent death. A fetch in Ireland can also mean a living ghost, or someone returned from the dead, and if the person is seen, and this includes in a dream, it means they need a prayer or a mass said for them. Folklore.ie has fascinating video records of people in Ireland seeing a fetch. One woman, 10 years ago or so in Nina, County Tipperary, talks to the camera about a strange experience of her son, who was up visiting her from Wexford. He came into the house pallid, drained. His mother asked him what on earth was going on. His son said, quote, "I was walking down the lane there, and I saw a man. He welcomed me back and shook my hand." End quote. His mother didn't say anything and waited until he said the name of the man. He then said the name, and then looked up at his mother, almost in dread, apprehensive to ask the following question. In a baffled, weak tone he asked, quote, "But that can't be him, can it? You told me he's been dead 6 or 8 weeks, hasn't he?" End quote. And he was indeed dead. He was the mother's neighbour, and he had died 2 months before. The son was in shock. He sat down shaken and tried to process what had just occurred. He then described how an awful feeling of dread came down upon him as he shook the dead man's hand, and he couldn't eradicate the feeling. He felt terrible. Immediately his mother declared that they should go into the town the next day to say a prayer in the church or speak to the priest to get a mass said for him, the only solution to seeing a fetch on the road at night. Sadly, at some point in our lives we will witness someone close to us dying. Many of you may have experienced this already and become a bedside spectator to someone's end of life. It is a strange twilight time sitting with a dying friend or relative. Although not always the case, and depending on the circumstance, it can be occasionally surprisingly reassuring as much as it is troubling or upsetting. You realize death is not to be feared, really. That it's natural, and most of the time, with luck and hope, peaceful. It's probably true to say that here in most parts of the UK at least, we're understandably not comfortable with death, or talking about it. We're afraid to sit with it, and it makes grief all the more a difficult hill to climb. In Ireland, the wake is still common practice. To sit with an open casket in the home for 3 nights, keeping the corpse company, helping them along their journey, and perhaps helping the grieving in the process. More often than not, death does come into our lives, and we may have had to nurse or even just be bystanders to those closest to us slipping away. It's in these dying embers of their moments, as startled in the headlights as we are at the time, that we become brave and astute to any changes the dying person endures, however subtle. It's in these moments that we have to become harbingers, messengers ourselves, estimate how much time someone has, like the Banshee. We have to judge when we have to make a call to someone far away, that they need to come now, that there isn't much time. We do this by watching and sensing their changes. There are physical signs you may be sadly familiar with: discoloring of the skin, the breathing taking on a different quality, the appetite for food, water, communication diminishing. You might pick up on their already otherworldliness, the sudden surge of energy many report of the dying, the wish to make peace, amends, the need to say goodbye, that final mysterious boost of life source before the end. Deathbed phenomena has been around for as long as we've been dying, of course. This often includes visions of deceased relatives and friends, music and angels, and that mysterious final burst of energy. Evidence of this will always be difficult to capture, to pinpoint, and scientists, cynics, may argue these are hallucinations, part of the process of the brain dying. Speak to hospice staff or anyone working in end-of-life care, and they would be hard-pushed to say dying is clinical. Instead, it is undeniably profound, and whether you believe in the afterlife or not, to witness the moment of death is moving. Undoubtedly transformative, and for many, contemplative or spiritual. In Ireland in 2009, 111 hospice staff were given a questionnaire asking them if this kind of deathbed phenomena is reported. The majority answered that yes, it had. That often patients would talk of deceased relatives visiting them, and that this was a positive, a comfort for the dying and for the living around them. They underlined it was important to validate these experiences. In a hospice recently, a good friend was dying. He talked of a watchman-like figure behind some people who visited, Victorian, holding up a lantern. He didn't believe in ghosts, the afterlife. His god was nature, well-plotted fell walks and the laws of the universe. But he spoke about this vision as a matter of fact, with a level of calm, as if it was just another person in the room visiting. He wasn't unsettled by it, far from it. It may have been his failing eyesight seeing the world slightly askew, and this is what his family assured each other, but with a chill down their spine all the same. There are many omens, superstitions, traditions that we associate with death too, either impending or recent, like the opening of windows to release the soul, and the covering of mirrors when someone dies. Historically, mirrors have been seen as portals into other worlds. Covering them up is the safest way to avoid the recently deceased to walk through, lose their way, or be trapped in them. A rocking chair in the house is something to not watch too keenly. You might scare yourself. For if it suddenly begins to rock by itself, it could indicate a relative is back from the afterlife to guide someone who is about to die in the house. Clocks are also intertwined with death in a house too. Some people report of clocks mysteriously stopping at the time of someone's death, and it's best to stop a ticking clock when someone dies in the house, exactly at the time of death. Otherwise their spirit might go on ticking too, believing they're still alive. And this taps into a fascinating idea relating to quantum physics. The idea that maybe we are in fact time ourselves. If we're not here, then time does not tick, to the absent person anyway. A confusing, crazy idea, but one quantum physicists such as Carlo Rovelli present, alongside questions such as, what is time anyway? Does it even exist? Is it a human construct? Does our perception of time actually correlate with the physical reality of it? With all this considered, if we are time, we had better treat it a little better. And is there some kind of knowing from ourselves before we die? And do we have an element of control? Are we harbingers ourselves? Bill Condon, when reflecting back on his life, may have thought this. In 1945, the war in Europe was in its death throes. The dust from the tanks and heels of the Allied forces driving across Europe was thick and plenty, with the Allied forces coming from the west and the south, and the Russians from the east. And at last, the Nazis were on the hoof, in a frenzied hurry, trying clumsily to hide the horrors they so heinously committed. In the midst of all this was Bill. Bill was born in Limerick in 1915. He went to London as a young lad in his 20s to try his luck and forge a new life. The war broke out, and somehow he was embroiled in the fighting and facing horrors which he could never have even imagined back in rural Ireland. It's true to say, he always felt a long way from home. A gentle young man, sensitive, bookish, intelligent, fighting was not in his nature. He faced the wrath of Rommel in the North African desert, the abrasive heat on his freckled skin. He again constantly yearned for Ireland. In 1945, though, Bill somehow had ended up as a prisoner of war in the notorious POW camp Stalag 8B in Lambsdorff. Overcrowded, with not much food to go around, the war ended and the Nazis were on the run, and with it they took their prisoners on what could only be called a death march, a march for hundreds of miles in almost Arctic conditions. Bill was on the point of exhaustion. He feared death was just a few more steps away. Bill and his comrades had little energy, yet still had an appetite for survival. By some miracle, the men encountered a troop of US soldiers. They were kind, they had food, blankets, and they pushed the revolver into Bill's hand. "Go do what you gotta do," they urged, implying the killing of his captors, if he wanted. Sensitive, caring Bill had no desire for that though, and he smiled politely and refused. Focused only on getting home, and he really sensed he should get home. It was a sense rising from his very core with urgency. Bill was sent back to the barracks in England. When he arrived, there was a letter from home. His beloved mother was ill, dying. Could he come home? Permission was given for a brief stay. His mother lay dying in her bed, calling for her Bill. Bill travelled the many miles it took to get home, a boat from Holyhead, where he helped a raven-haired young woman from Connemara smuggle bike tyres onto the boat. He promptly fell in love with her. He ended up marrying her. But that's another tale. Finally, he arrived home one evening, raced to his mother who was in her bed. They clasped hands, and her joy to see him for one last time was evident. They wept and prayed. That night, Bill felt content and fell asleep, concerned about his mother, but so relieved he was there. A few hours later, he heard a wail. He sat bolt upright and instinctively raced to his mother's room, where she took her last breath and died. He knew she had waited for him. His sisters told him too that she would not rest until she saw her Bill again. Bill was in half a mind to believe it. And the wail he heard? He never knew where it came from. Was it his mother's death rattle? Was she calling him? Or was it something else? Many people in Ireland since the famine have taken their chances and gone overseas to start a new life. And if it was America, the chances of their family seeing them again were nil. So when they went and boarded a ship across the Atlantic, it was like a death, and a live wake would be had for them. In the 1930s, John Joe, Bill's brother, did just that. The day before he boarded, a wake was held for him. There was no coffin, but plenty of drink, laughter, lamenting and tears. The family, impoverished, had no means of ever getting there. Bill, convinced he would never see him again, clasped his brother tight and wept and wished him well. 38 years later, with more money in his pocket and air travel more commonplace, Bill decided he needed to fly to Chicago to see his brother. Within hours of arriving and embracing each other, John Joe dropped dead of a brain hemorrhage. Bill, devastated, shaken, helpless as he endured yet another wake for his brother, a very real wake this time. Of course, the hemorrhage was probably always likely to happen to John Joe, and it may have been the excitement of seeing his brother after all this time, but Bill couldn't help but draw parallels with his mother, that somehow the soul waited just a little longer or so to say goodbye. Mary Agnes, Marie's grandmother, who we heard from at the start of the episode, still never believed in ghosts, and although the Banshee never cried for her, in 2006 when she was dying in a hospital in Ireland, there were signs given to her family that she was about to leave this plane. Mary Agnes had been slipping away after enduring painful uterine cancer. Her dying wasn't pleasant or easy for her, but now with morphine in her veins and her family around her, she was in that otherworldly state, drifting, enough to speak the odd line, and then to return to her dreams where she seemed to have a foot in the other world. A few hours before she died, something strange happened. As they sat around her bed, the door, heavy, mechanical, and firmly shut, began to open, and then purposefully close, as if someone had walked in. This happened again, and then again a few minutes later, and then a few minutes later again, until it was noticeable to all in the room. And on the fourth or fifth door opening and closing, the family looked at each other, slightly disturbed by these purposeful door openings, expecting a doctor to burst in after each creak of the door. There was nothing wrong with the door, and it was only for those few minutes. Afterwards, in the days that followed, the family mused if it was something odd, something supernatural. One person ventured, was it the family from the other side coming in to collect, to take home? It felt like there was a room full. It was comforting to believe. They hoped that was the case. Mary Agnes peacefully slipped away as dawn rose that morning, a few hours after the doors, but her family knew, just as if they had heard the Banshee, that it was her time. As we close the door on this episode, Tess of the D'Urbervilles' thoughts ring true of how that date lies sly as we pass over it every year. It's probably one of the more chilling thoughts that we can have, and no one wants to dwell on it too much. But I think it's always there in the back of our minds. How long have we got? But if that day does lay sly, let's make sure we root out every day, pick it up and live it. Savor all the rich experiences as much as we can, even the mundane bits, which in time, I guess we will realize really were the richer bits. Don't set the clock too much, but be mindful of its tick, and go and do something you've always wanted. Do good for people you love, and for you, or just enjoy sitting on the sofa with your people. And while the Banshee might indeed know the date of death for many, where it lurks, by a general rule, we thankfully don't. However, be careful the next time you're in Ireland. It's night time and the stars haven't come out, so the sky seems like a void of inkiness, and the only thing breaking it up is a fog on the lane up ahead. It swells more into a fine mist. It starts to take form. Remember now, it's time to look away, to run for your life. You hear something and let me tell you it's not a fox, it's not a cat. So close your ears now, for the mournful call always signals the beginning of someone's finish. Turn sharply around now, face the other way. Go back from whence you came and run, because the next person to hear the Banshee's cry could be you. Do you have an interesting story which you'd be willing to share with the show? If so, your story could feature in our end of season Listener Stories episodes. Please get in touch with the show via email at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com, marking the subject as Listener Story. We'll be waiting for you. As well as Patreon, you can also follow the Haunted UK podcast on Twitter @HauntedUKPod, on Instagram at Haunted UK Podcast and also on our website at www.hauntedukpodcast.com. You'll be able to keep up to date with news and announcements, browse and download our episode scripts, get in contact with us, and much more. This episode was presented by Steve, produced by Pink Flamingo Home Studio. The script for this episode was edited by Marie Waller Proofreading. For more information about this service, contact Marie at mariewaller.proofreading@gmail.com. For a list of all research sources which we found helpful for the writing of this episode, please see the show's notes. Thank you again for listening to and supporting the Haunted UK podcast. So until the next episode, stay safe and take care.